Welcome back, friends. It is Thursday, referred to in the life of the church alternately as Holy Thursday, sometimes called Maundy Thursday, from the old Latin mandatum novum, which means a new commandment. The new commandment that Jesus gave, that you should love one another as I love you.
When you just slip in and out of dead languages, it's very impressive.
You know, I took 3 years of Latin in high school, so you would think I might have remembered something. And so, mandatum novum, new commandment. And as we walk through the events of Holy Week, we talked about Monday, we talked about the destruction of the temple. There's not a lot recorded in the Gospels on Tuesday. Wednesday, we have this fascinating conversation in which Jesus and his disciples are probably standing up on the Mount of Olives. They see this amazing, gorgeous temple in the area.
I think it's even by our modern standards that the temple of Herod's temple, as it was called, would have been impressive.
Certainly a marvel of the world, and something that was held in just high esteem. And so the disciples are standing there, and the Bible records in, say, Matthew in the latter chapters, Jesus, isn't that beautiful? And Jesus says, that place?
Yeah.
I tell you, there's not one stone going to be left one upon another, and you're going to see it. You're going to live to see it. They're like, what? Mm-hmm. You've got to be, what? Tell us when this will be. They get all excited and, tell us what this is going to happen. And, of course, we do know that by 68, some 30-something years after Jesus' resurrection, there was a Roman-Jewish war of 68. By 70, indeed, the temple was destroyed. The only remnant of that still today is what we would look at and know as the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall. And so these events that Jesus prophesied probably on that Wednesday of Holy Week, they came true.
They came true. And to think that something so substantial could be knocked down, and you got these, depending on the gospel you read, this may have been the first time these disciples had ever been to Jerusalem.
Yeah,
even though some of them, I mean, even though it wasn't that far, again, it may have been the first time they ever laid eyes on the temple.
Right. And what's fascinating is, again, we got to go a few weeks ago, and they are actually still doing excavations, and they're finding more and more of the old temple area. They're finding more, about this water system that was underneath. It really is fascinating that the more they find, the more the veracity of the scriptures is a test to the veracity of it.
So what? And I wonder from Jesus' perspective. I mean, you've got to think this is God, right? This is God incarnate. Knows of all the heavenly realm. And I wonder if Jesus isn't like, he's watching these disciples be impressed by a building. He's like, you've not seen anything.
Right. You're getting. So then let's move, Steve, into the conversation. Let's go from Wednesday into Thursday. Thursday is the day before Passover begins. And Jesus has already made some preparation. And we, again, got to go to this place called the Upper Room. Was it exactly the spot where Jesus would have been? Not exactly sure, but it would have been really close,
right,
and would have looked a lot like what Jesus would have been using that for those times.
So it was customary for a rabbi, which would mean Jesus was considered to, and his group of disciples, to lead them through the Passover dinner or the Passover meal. So he, again, makes the preparations, everything's ready, gathers with his disciples. And they're expecting, their expectation at this point, it's almost like they still had not sunk into their being that Jesus was going to die.
And so I can't imagine, however, that there was a heightened sense of excitement, a heightened sense of anxiety, a heightened sense of,
well, because certainly this would have been Jesus would have celebrated Passover with them previously, but this is in Jerusalem. This is different.
Big time.
Right.
And so the Gospel of John records that on that same night, as if we look in John chapter 13, that Jesus does the extraordinary act. And I don't know there's any way to understate the absolute, just mind-blowing what Jesus did. He removes his outer robe, he ties a towel around his waist, and he goes around the tables. and he washes the feet of his disciples. And Peter looks at him and says,
Not me.
yeah, you're not about to do, no.
You're not going to debase yourself by washing my feet.
Right. I love you. I adore you. I think I know who you are. And for a Messiah, the Son of the living God, to wash my feet, I cannot allow that to happen.
And Jesus is like, unless you allow this, you have no part of what I'm about.
Yeah. And so on Thursday, we will have foot washing, along with a communion service here on this Thursday. And I often think about how uncomfortable we are with this notion of foot washing. And maybe we should. Maybe we should. We see it from a cultural thing, but it is a stark thing to think that Jesus would bow down and become like the lowliest of the slaves, that's who have been doing the foot washing in the Roman or the culture of the day. The lowest of the servants would have stood by the door, washing the feet, the dusty, nasty, muddy feet of the people who came into the home. And that's the place Jesus assumes. He says, I'll be that person for you.
So he models what servant leadership looks like.
And says, if you love me, then you ought to do the same thing for others.
And serve others.
Yeah.
Right. Pretty remarkable. And then he goes on to celebrate the Passover meal. And again, read through the various Gospels because they all tell it a little bit differently. John is the only one who has the foot washing. Mm-hmm. So in Matthew's Gospel and Mark and Luke, they have the Passover meal, and Jesus does something different that they were not expecting.
So he likely takes, if you know the Jewish Seder meal, you know that there are 3 cups of wine, and the third cup was the cup of thanksgiving. And we don't know for sure, but it seems as if Jesus would have taken, again, that unleavened bread, that matzah, and then he takes that third cup of thanksgiving. And while they were eating, I'm reading from Matthew chapter 26, verse 26. While they were eating, Jesus took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it, gave it to the disciples, and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from this, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for you for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will never again drink of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." And when they had sung the hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. So, Steve, we could spend podcast and podcast and podcast to explore the depth of meaning of this, what we refer to now as Holy Communion, Lord's Supper, Eucharist, all of those names that we alternately use. What is it that Jesus has done?
Well, and I wonder how they would have reacted when he says, "This is my blood." Because I know when I'm serving communion and we serve, it's an open table at the United Methodist Church, and we invite children to come. I've sometimes said, "This is the blood of Christ," and a little kid will look at you like, "You want me to what?"
Drinking blood.
No, it's better to say it's his life, right? Blood's equated to life. This is another way to think about it. This is my life poured out for you. Well, for what? For the forgiveness of sins, for that which separates you from God, for that where you've missed the mark with God. My life is laid down so that you can be aligned with God once again. That's for all of humanity, right? So it's an amazing statement. And I imagine they're sitting around the table going, "What is he talking about?" And he tells them, "Do this. You're going to have to do this again and again and again to get it. Mm-hmm. Repeat this." And that's something we've been repeating that meal for 2,000 years.
Yeah, I think in so many ways the depth of this, again, grounded in the Passover meaning. If you know from the Old Testament, the meaning of the Passover meal was celebrating God's deliverance from the forces of darkness. And so many different levels of meaning, but one of those surely for us is grounded in that same Passover meaning, that this is the release for us from bondage, from sin and death, and to pass over into this new life.
Release. It's all there. And so Most of us are familiar with that part of Thursday night, but and often we stop right there.
Yeah.
But it's not over.
No, the night is just beginning, and it's going to be a long, difficult night around which we'll spend more of our time tomorrow talking about the events of
we'll
that
talk
night.
about what happens after the meal and into Friday.
Yeah.
Because it's appropriate, because when does the day begin in Jewish tradition?
It begins at Sunday, the next day. So what's going to happen at Huntersville on this Thursday, we're going to have drive-through communion out in front of the building from 11:30 to 1. If especially you can't get out at night, it's a great time to come. Your pastors will be out in front. We'll be offering communion. We'll be praying with you. We'll be talking with you about the events of this week. That night we will have a truly beautiful service. We did it last year. Charles Morrow does an outstanding job. There's literally a full table of food, from cheese and crackers and all sorts of great stuff. And so that night we'll gather at 7 p.m. in the worship center. I really, really encourage you to be there.
And we'll be having our Maundy, Thursday service, or Holy Thursday at 7 with special music. We'll be moving through the events of that night with song and scripture. And then we will be having Holy Communion. Yeah. So 7 o'clock in the sanctuary.
Thank you so much. Holy Thursday, we hope to see you throughout the day.
Thank you.